Welcome to HISD Now. I'm Justin Sternberg. Thank you for joining us. Houston is talking about HISD, and so is the nation, including folks at Harvard. We caught up with Paul Peterson, the Director of Program Education Policy and Governance at Harvard University, who recently spoke with Superintendent Mike Miles. But we wanted to find out why so many are keeping an eye on what the district is doing to ensure quality education for all students. From a national standpoint, what's kind of the talk? What's in your mind? What are you guys looking at? What piques your interest?
Well, of course, Houston School District had pretty high ratings, about a decade ago or more. And it got prizes from the Broad Foundation, I think, on 2 occasions. So it was thought to be really one of the up-and-coming school districts. But then it sort of went into a period where it seemed to be not holding up to expectations. And so eventually the state takes over, and that's quite a extended battle over whether or not they had the authority to do it. And it's just finally happened. So all of that is a very interesting story, and especially bringing in a superintendent from the nearby city of Dallas to assume responsibility for the school. So for me, that's a very interesting story in urban education.
What have you seen from the point of takeover to kind of where we are now?
So, there's 2 views about what we need to do to reform our schools that are out there. And one point of view is that we have to free up teachers from all the regulations that are out there and let them teach. Let them be the boss of the classroom, and indeed the boss of the school. That teachers should be running their own schools. This has been an idea that's been around since charter schools were invented back in before 2000. They get started around 1990, and the early thinking there was teachers should be running the schools themselves. And so that's a very important view, and that view was expressed again at the Hoover Institution in a report that just came out that talked about putting teachers in charge bottom up. Well, when I talked with the superintendent the other day when he was at the Hoover Institution, Superintendent Miles, I was impressed by his thinking, which was that actually teachers need a lot of help, and they like help. They feel supported, that they need to be given a set of guidelines, both in what to teach for the particular group of students they have at that grade level, and the manner in which they should teach, how they should keep students engaged. Well, Miles is not the first person to come up with that idea, but it's not a very fashionable idea. It's much easier to say, let teachers be in charge, and the idea that you really need to give guidelines and direction. Now, that idea has been picked up elsewhere. The science of reading. The science of reading is a new idea out there, and the science of reading sort of says teachers have been not following the science of reading. They haven't been actually teaching phonics, and this is the way you can teach phonics, and this is the best way to teach that, and to fill in a more balanced literacy approach into that framework. But to do it that way, you need to have a clear set of instructions. So the idea of giving strong signals to teachers as to how you should approach the classroom setting is making a comeback, I'd say, out there. And it's making a definite comeback in Houston. And so you're looking at Houston as to say, well, how well are they doing? Because this is an approach which may deserve more attention. And I'm not going to take a position as to who's got the right approach, because I think it's still early days and we have to see whether or not this can actually work at scale. But of course, if you look at the latest results from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, Houston looks pretty good. I mean, it's not had a big setback, which you have seen in other places. So this is early returns, but really it's something to keep an eye on.
Do we see them going in the right direction?
Well, state takeovers are very unpopular. I mean, if you look at them around the country, you see that communities generally resent the state coming in and say we can do a better job. And that usually means that the local school board's losing its authority over the schools, and it still has a certain legitimacy in the community. So it's never easy for a state to take over. And many places it hasn't worked out. It's gone backwards. However, there are some places where it definitely has worked. And that is usually because a superintendent has found an approach that really works and actually begins to have an impact on children and on learning. And I'm not saying that you can show that within 1 year or 2 years, so you got to show that over a period of time. But I think the best way to look at the Mike Miles in Houston is to say he deserves a chance. And so far he's done well enough that he deserves a chance. And whether or not the political opposition that normally occurs when a state takes over is going to be too strong to overcome for him, I don't know. As an outsider, I can't say.
Looking at the district as a whole, do you think the interest in it could kind of set a precedent for other big urban districts around the country, like models?
Definitely. I do think that because it's a strong new approach, vigorously defended, and I think there's an opportunity there for other people to say, well, maybe we should do that. So there'll be a concern about the politics. You got to remember that Michelle Rhee in Washington, D.C. back in 2008, 2009 came in with a really good idea, stood by it, and her successor stood by it, and the D.C. school system has definitely improved. But her ideas were so controversial that the mayor lost the next election. Nobody else has really wanted to go down that track. So, you know, school reform is not an easy task. It's a very challenging task.
Do you think in the long run that everybody truly has the kids as the center?
That's a good question. I appreciate you bringing that up because actually I'll have to admit that when I had a conversation with Mike Miles, I felt that he really genuinely cared that kids learn. And he was much less interested in the politics of things than he was whether or not kids learned. And I think that's a huge asset that he's bringing to the table.
You can check out Mr. Peterson's podcast with Superintendent Miles at educationnext.org/podcast or click on that QR code. Coming up at 12, Lana Hill sits down with district leaders to discuss how HISD is preparing students for meaningful career paths that lead to good paying jobs. We'll see you then.